let's talk about rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is the process of drawing over a piece of footage frame by frame, very much like I'm doing now. This produces very smooth motion without any restrictions on the final look of the animation. It can be simple outlines, or fully colored, or very abstract. No matter what the style is though, it always has the same starting point. A piece of footage traced over either by hand or through the use of a computer. Rotoscoping is not only used in animation though, it was also heavily used and still is to this day in some difficult cases in visual effects, to create mattes in order to separate an object from the rest of the image and superimpose that into a new background. An early use case of that can be seen in Song of the South, a 1946 Disney movie you won't be able to easily find on the market. Not because it's old, but because it's highly controversial due to the way race is handled. The Disney company has refused to release it on DVD or Blu-ray. It was on heavy rotation though on TV when I was a kid, so I must have seen the movie at least half a dozen times, but nowadays you cannot purchase the movie. It was very technologically advanced though, and was one of the first times we saw blending of cartoons with actors. That blending is achieved through rotoscoped mattes by tracing over the actor and then adding him into the cartoon environment. The result is extremely impressive, and I remember just being glued to the TV set when the animated portions were on. It felt like pure magic. Even though the results can be impressive, creating mattes, especially back in the analog days, is a very tedious process, requiring a lot of patience. Rotoscoping though is more interesting when used in animation. It can create some beautiful and very impressive results. Max Fleischer, the inventor of rotoscoping, stunned audiences in the early 20s with a series of animations using this technique. The Tantalising Fly is one of the first movies showcasing the technique, with a simple but effective plot. Coco the Clown, a sketch coming to life, is trying to get rid of a fly that annoys him and the artist who created him. The more comfortable the artist became with the technique, the more we started seeing rotoscoping used more as reference for movement and timing rather than a complete copy of the original piece of film. For example, in the 1932 Betty Boop Minnie and the Moocher, the performer doesn't have the shape of a human being, but rather that of a walrus. In another occasion, in 1933's Betty Boop and Snow White, we see Coco the Clown transform into a ghostly dancing figure, creating some amazingly creepy but fluid animation. Once Max Fleischer's patent expired, other creators were free to now use and experiment with the technique. As a result, we get to experience some amazing rotoscoping work in movies, music videos, and video games. Rotoscoping is considered by some cheating, since the animator is relying too much on something that is already there. But as you can see, the results that can come out of this technique are incredible. When used creatively and in the hands of experts, the final result can benefit immensely from it. So I personally wouldn't consider rotoscoping the easy way out. For example, in the game Flashback, we are transported into a futuristic imaginary world where we're trying to figure out what happened to the main character. The smooth and realistic animation of the main hero is what helps ground this imaginary world into reality. By controlling this realistic character, the gamer feels like this world could actually exist, making us at the same time more invested into the game and sympathizing with the character when something bad happens to him. If we take a closer look, we will notice that there are no facial features and no real detail to the character. The animation alone is what makes the character feel real. More real than any other game of that era, with the exception maybe of other rotoscoped games like Prince of Persia or Karateka. Creating the characters' different animated cycles, like running, shooting, involves a lot of artistry. Each action is only a handful of frames, but because the key poses are perfectly chosen, the final result looks amazing. What is worth noting here is that switching between all these different actions feels very smooth and handles amazingly well when controlling the character. The animation cycles in Flashback could be a whole video of its own. The artistry required in drawing the character and figuring out the right timings is quite high, especially when compared to earlier rotoscoped games like Prince of Persia, where the switch between actions was obvious and more abrupt. As a kid playing the game, I remember just being blown away by it and feeling totally immersed in this weird sci-fi world. It was a simpler time. What I'm trying to say with all this is that rotoscoping, if used the right way, can have a big impact on the final product, whether that is a video game or a movie or something else. Another brilliant use case of rotoscoping, where the technique is not just used as a crutch but as part of the story, pushing storytelling forward, has to be a Haas music video for Take On Me. In it, the world of a comic book and that of the real world seamlessly blend together through the use of rotoscoping. More than 2,000 frames were traced over in a painstaking 16-week schedule. The video clip was a great success, and it justified the group's decision to scrap the previous version of the song and its video clip and re-release it instead a year later with this more powerful music video. The video was inspired by Michael Peterson's award-winning student short, The Commuter, which used rotoscoping to show a day in the life of, you guessed it, a commuter. He was the one also responsible for all the drawings in Aha's Take On Me. His short was used later on in another one of Aha's songs, Train of Thought, where the rotoscoped footage of the band are seamlessly blended together with footage from Peterson's short. Aha was probably the band with the most rotoscoped music videos. They had 3 videos in total using rotoscoping, with the third one being The Sun Always Shines on TV, which picked things up where the previous song Take On Me left off. One of the first times we saw this idea of a story being told through several music videos. Because of the huge success of Take On Me, the style was heavily copied in the following years. We can see the influence of it in the video clip of Howard Jones's You Know I Love You, Don't You, where the video clip closely follows the lyrics of the song. Or in the strangest of all places, in the movie Harry and the Hendersons, where the use of the technique didn't really make sense, but it definitely made for some beautiful end credits. The art style was an exact copy of the one used in Aha's Take On Me. But that doesn't mean we didn't see more creative uses of rotoscoping. In the late 70s and throughout the 80s, the technique was everywhere, and through each iteration, the results from a technical standpoint got more and more impressive. For example, Peterson's next music video, Opposites Attract, used rotoscoping for One More Time. A cartoon cat is blended seamlessly to a real environment, and it's interacting with the main artist of the song, Paul Abdul. Rotoscoping was used to draw over Michael Chambers, the real performer behind the cat's movements, and it was used mainly as a reference for timing and to copy dance moves. This was another huge success, with the video playing day and night on MTV. And it's a great example of blending cartoon and real-world elements. Rotoscoping wasn't only limited in these real-world, cartoon world scenarios, it was also used in fully animated productions. A great example of that is the 1983 movie Fire and Ice. All action sequences were shot with actors, and they were then handed over to the animators as a series of photographs to trace over. While the animation is all based on real life, all the environments are purely based on the artist's imagination. This blending of hyper-realistic movement with fantastical landscapes creates a world that feels believable and lived in. A few years before that, in 1978, Bakshi again brought Lord of the Rings to the movie theaters. Through the use of animation and rotoscoping, he managed to bring Tolkien's complex world onto film. something that would be impossible to do at that period of time if the movie was completely shot as real action. The effects required wouldn't be possible, and the whole production would cost way more than what the animated movie cost. It would take 23 years and a huge budget until we got to see Lord of the Rings as a real action movie in 2001. This is where rotoscoping shines. It can make something look like $1 million, even though the cost of the production might be incredibly low. Let's take, for example, the animated show Gem. The actual animation in each episode was typical of its era and nothing really worth talking about. But the intro employed the use of rotoscoping in order to impress and draw in the young audience. The animation is fluid and very realistic, and in combination with the catchy song and the quick editing, it's an immediate attention grabber. Rotoscoping is not only impressive to kids though, it can equally impress grown-ups. Tom Waits, a unique artist with very dedicated fans, used rotoscoping in 1979 to produce the short film Tom Waits for No One. Like the rotoscoped movie Heavy Metal, it was targeting a more mature audience. Even though it's just an animation sequence, it has a great mood and manages to perfectly capture the essence of Tom Waits' character and his world. At this point, we also need to mention two of the most discussed rotoscoped movies, at least in the art circles, and that's Waking Life and Scanner Darkly. Both come from the same director, Richard Linklater. Waking Life, Linklater's first dive into animation, uses computers in order to make the whole rotoscoping process faster. The artist draws some of the key poses and layers, and then the computer interpolates between those poses. Because everything is drawn in layers, the artist can then go in and individually manipulate different elements of the sequence and make them smaller or bigger, rotate them, or completely move them out of place. This ability is put to good use throughout the movie, enhancing the director's idea of presenting a dreamlike, surreal world that might be real or might just be someone's dream. Facial features and the whole environment move left and right, and everything feels like it's in a constant state of change. In some cases, the effect can be nauseating, but the decision to use the technique feels very calculated and intentional, and not just a product of the director's fixation with the technique. Linklater's second attempt at the technique feels again intentional and is driven from the subject matter of the movie. The protagonist is struggling to find his identity. No one can really see his true self because he's wearing a high-tech suit that can look like anybody, and as a result, because no one can see his true self, he slowly loses track of who he really is. The movie also deals with addiction and what the protagonists witness when they are under the influence. Through the use of rotoscoping, everything again is in constant change and movement, with faces and lines constantly shifting and transforming. In this movie though, the director feels a little bit more in love with the technique and the improved version of the software, rather than the actual subject matter. As much as the director wants to tell a story, it also feels like he is trying to find how far the technique can be pushed. As a result, the use of rotoscoping here feels a little bit more forced than in Waking Life. With the exception of the dreamlike sequences and the scrambling suit, the animated movie looks exactly like the real footage. So one can wonder, what is the point of animating something if it's going to look exactly the same as the original? But besides that, it's a really interesting example of what can be done with computer-aided rotoscoping. With the use of computers, tracing an image can now take only a couple of seconds. The artist is still needed though in order to create a pleasing image, but it's definitely a much faster process than doing everything by hand. No matter though how the effect is produced, rotoscoping is a beautiful technique that managed to produce some stunning work throughout the years. We've barely scratched the surface here. I'll have a list with some of the most exciting works in the description below, so do yourself a favor and watch as many as you can. You won't regret it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.